Jennie Joseph presents The Hands That Caught Us, a legacy podcast series with our midwife elders, an archival offering through the Perinatal Pause Podcast with Jennie Joseph, where we rest, reclaim, and remember one story at a time. Welcome to The Hands That Caught Us, a sacred series within the Perinatal Pause Podcast with Jennie Joseph. In each episode, we sit in reverence with our elder midwives, keepers of ancestral knowledge, community healers, and witnesses to the sacred continuum of life. These conversations are a pause, a restoration, and a reclaiming of our birthright. These are the stories that built us, and these are the stories that sustain us.
Well, I am so pleased and tickled pink to welcome the amazing Karline Wilson Mitchell. This woman, Karline, thank you for coming on today.
I'm so grateful and honored to have been invited to come. Anything to do with common sense midwifery and with you, Jennie Joseph, I would go to the moon and back for you. You are.
I feel the same way. Bless you. I do. I mean, from the day I met you, Karline, and it's been so many years, but you have always just been this beacon of pure, unadulterated love and knowledge and joy and all the things. And I'm looking forward to what we're going to talk about today because, this podcast series is really to just hear the stories and hear from our elder midwives who have really held us up this long. I mean, it's called The Hands That Caught Us. And I really want us to explore, and hear from you as to your journey through this whole midwifery life, this whole midwifery movement, this everything midwifery. You to me represent every last facet of it. Let us start off with where did it begin for you? How did you even land here in terms of midwifery? When did this happen for you?
Well, in the 1980s, because I was an immigrant from Jamaica, from my childhood, I grew up in Canada. And as I was pursuing university studies in the 1980s, I got wind of this birth center movement. And then attached to that was the midwifery movement. And what lit the fire and the passion to even pursue midwifery was being a nursing student and having my obstetrics rotation. And my preceptor, my supervising clinical instructor, was a Scottish trained midwife who was Jamaican born. She became my superhero. I wanted to be just like her. Her assessment skills, her ability to manage conflict and complex situations quickly, safely. I wanted to pursue midwifery. So that was in the early 1980s. And my passion, my dream, and the creator gave me an opportunity to come to the United States and study in 1988.
Okay. So early 80s. Do you know, are there any in your line, any history, any family, any ancestors that may have been in that same path? We're exploring this calling that comes upon us all when we get it. We cannot fight it. You can't run from it. You can't even hide from it, right? And what we're hearing from others and so many stories of, my great somebody was a midwife, or my auntie on my dad's side. Do you have any of that in your family line that you're aware of?
It's interesting you should say that. I am trying to trace my family tree. Many of us in the diaspora have had a lost genealogy, a lost history, lost names. Those things are part of our spiritual, traditional, ancestral ways of being. And so it has robbed us. We are going through the grief and loss. I'm fighting to learn more. I do know that my great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother, delivered my grandmother on a ship, delivered herself. Basically, she midwifed herself, was on a ship from Panama to Jamaica. This would have been in the 1890s, 1880. And of course, the master decides when you go and when you stay. And she must have gone into labor on the ship as they were leaving Panama and delivered my grandmother on this ship. This grandmother was apparently from what was called the nation of Dahomey, or now Benin. And
Mhm.
apparently there's Bantu and Benin and sort of Central African, West African, Ghanaian blood there. But there's also Taino blood there in my mother's family.
Yeah,
So the Taino Indians that were throughout Central America and the Caribbean. And so when I think of the history that I'm doing now, I'm doing some archival historical research, looking at how many of our people carried ancestral knowledge from their midwives and griots and elders, and they carried it in their hearts and their minds and their bodies. And they learned how to take care of themselves even so far removed from their home on the continent. There were many midwives who didn't get the title. I don't
that's
know
right.
if my great grandmother was one of those. I don't know if because she delivered her own baby, they asked her in the community once she got to Jamaica to deliver other people's babies
That's right.
because she had done one, maybe she can attend theirs. So I don't know, but there are a lot of nurses, and many of the nurses studied midwifery as well.
As well. It goes together
Yes.
for many of us,
Yes.
especially if we're following that British training, that European training that was brought to the West Indies. Nursing and midwifery go together,
Yes.
right? And there's so much there inside of what you've just said. You've
Mhm.
given us this picture where, again, this forgotten, so-called forgotten, erased piece that is relevant. Because in terms of, your relative's skills in terms of delivering her own, but also being asked to take on the others, midwives have historically, and maybe even now, right up to this day, except in America, except where it's been colonized, midwives have always been chosen by their community.
Yes.
Key. I mean, it just your story is so beautiful as it illustrates that very thing happening organically.
Mhm.
Organically, she labors and has a baby. That's what happens. You have nothing to do about stopping it, changing the time frame, waiting for it's on, it's on.
Mhm.
And the physiological and the emotional, spiritual, everything that's part of that process will happen time and time again and has done for millennia. But the other part, which goes together with midwifery, is that the whatever those strengths and acuity, not acuity, the ability for the spiritual relationship to transform and bond and elicit trust and
Yes.
belief and safety. That piece is the invisible piece of midwifery. It goes both
It's
ways. It's a
it's
two-way street.
invisible in Western midwifery. It
Yes,
is
ma'am.
not invisible in African centered, antebellum centered
Yes,
ancestral midwifery.
that's
Um,
right.
so amazing we're talking about this because from my recent research, I'm realizing that the midwives were these elders and griots. They had a community leadership role in every village and every town. And they brought that with them to the Americas and to the Caribbean, wherever they went. They brought that idea of what we now label Ubuntu or communitarianism, where the
Yes,
community, you're not healthy as an individual. The
yes,
community must be healthy. You don't ask for payment for catching babies because it's your gifting, and people will, barter or give you something because you need something, not because there's a price attached to it. And so service to the community, being welcomed, encouraged by the community to work in your gifting, in the talents that you have, and that whole idea of birth was not separated from who they were as a community. It was part of the healthcare of the community, and therefore the midwife was essential.
I mean, there's so many things to talk about and there's so many things to explore. Let's jump to, I want you to share with everyone your professional midwifery path, where you are now, how you got here, and why it's so significant for all of us who, like you say, we choose our midwives, but we also choose who are our mentors, who are our elders, who are we looking up to? And you have such a trajectory. We have to share that. So why don't you sort of give us the journey to where
Mhm.
you are and how you got here, and also, at this present day, Karline, the midwife, who's she?
Okay, let's start. Do you have time for a long story?
Yeah,
Um,
story.
a naive young Jamaican immigrant who had all these insecurities as a young woman in their 20s, traveling to a brand new country, United States, with all of the concerns that were going on with civil unrest and racism in the South at that time, coming to Florida and, being part of the midwifery education program at University of Miami. That program is now defunct. They closed the doors to that program. There are so many doors closing in the South teaching midwifery. We need more midwifery schools. But
Yes,
I studied for a couple of years in the master's degree program. It was a Master of Science in Nursing. So you had the very heavy schedule of the master's program, and then midwifery was on top of that. But you had to meet all the criteria for the Master's of Science in Nursing. So you ended up being a nurse midwife. There's strengths to that.
yes,
Nursing became the sort of foundation and stepping stone, and I stepped on it to launch into midwifery. There are many other paths. I picked up some bad habits in nursing that are very colonial, very militaristic, because hospitals and the healthcare system is designed on a military sort of SWAT team, the MASH teams that were employed in the Second World War. That's where hospitals came from. Hospitals came from units that were in war zones. That's why we have doctor's orders. That's why there's hierarchy. That's why there's, inequity in the hospital structure. So I had to unlearn a lot of that to learn how to collaborate in a more egalitarian and equitable way. And midwifery was great for that because midwifery taught me how to be a social activist, how to find my voice, how to be concerned about reproductive justice, environmental justice, how to be concerned about communities. I know today's demographic, our Gen X and Gen Z, they shy away from the word community and they're using the word demographic. But for us, baby boomers, it's community. And I learned that. I got a chance to witness out of hospital births when we had rotations in birth centers, but I didn't have the joy of working in the out of hospital environment until I got back to Canada 20 years later. So launched
Hmm.
into midwifery in 1992. I worked in um, for about 8 years in the Florida community, primarily hospital-based birth, primarily being employed by either a physician in a physician organization, where we would collaborate and work as a team together, and the midwifery piece of the pie and the physician piece of the pie, and we would work collaboratively together. Or I worked in a hospital-based system where there was a division of midwifery and where there was just as you have the head of medicine, you'd have the head of midwifery. And that to me is a great model as well, to be able to have a place in the hierarchy where you're at the table when decisions are being made, or where midwives are invited to be part of the peer review committee. So those kinds of things are amazing. I got to work in the Everglades I was doing some teaching at Florida International University. I needed a break from midwifery because I was working 24/7, 365, about 120 hours a week. I was burnt out after 5 years of working in private practice. Um,
That was
you
in
know,
Miami, right,
I
Colleen?
was actually in the Palm Beach County, so I was in
Uh-huh.
Boca, Boynton Beach, West Palm Beach, then out into the Everglades. But my catchment area was those sort of four cities: Lakehead, Boca, Boynton Beach, Lake Worth. That area. And then once I started teaching, I of course wanted to maintain currency. So I would take these part-time contracts, either working in West Palm Beach for a weekend at the hospital there. And it was wonderful getting to work with a large team of midwives. That was something. And it was a large Hispanic population, many of them migrant farm workers, and um, learning how to manage 10 labors at the same time, in Spanish or in English or whatever we could mix together. And also learning to trust the women and their bodies, and knowing that if I was working with a Guatemalan family, that if I allowed her to dance and squat and move as she needed to move, that baby would come out like a torpedo. And I just had to look for the signs. And so, would I want to do that today, managing 10 people at the same time? It's not the best, but we had a trusting relationship, as you were saying.
Yeah.
And that trusting relationship was built over maybe a couple of clinic visits or over an hour of meeting you for the first time. And the trusting relationship, the listening skills, the inclusivity, bringing the family in, involving everybody. I bend the rules. How many family members want to be there, can be there because they're needed, their community. And so, I was fortunate to have all those experiences and then to go and work in the Everglades area that was a different population, very poor, remote, low resourced. I'd take my teenage patients out for lunch at McDonald's because they hadn't eaten for a while, and that's what you do. And then drive an hour and a half back to get back to, Miami, to resume working at FIU the next day. So that was what I did for a few years. And then I moved to North Carolina. I was there for about 6 years, and I worked in a practice that was the dream job. A couple of physicians who really highly valued midwifery and practiced like midwives. And
That's
the
the key.
midwives had their own clients and the physicians had their own clients. And we delivered at the Women's Hospital in Greensboro, a women's hospital. It was looking after all kinds of women's kinds of ailments, whether it's GYN or OB. A wonderful experience. I then moved to Georgia and practiced in a physician-owned practice there, where there was a team of midwives, team of physicians again. And then family responsibilities brought me back to Canada. So after 20 years catching babies in the United States, I came back to Canada and took on a job teaching at Toronto Metropolitan University, previously named Ryerson, but we've changed the name to really, separate ourselves from the legacy of that previous founder of the school, who really was involved in some very, very controversial oppression of Indigenous and Black people. The segregation, uh, the this the sorry, the term slips me, but children were abducted from their homes and placed into residential schools, and they were
Mm.
abused. And he was one of the policymakers for that. So we changed the name of our university to Toronto Metropolitan University. It's been an exciting 18 years with them. We are
18 years.
growing, we are learning. I was brought as the only current tenured professor who is of African origin in Canada. And this
In the country.
36 years of integrated midwifery in Canada now, that it is regulated in every province and territory. But we still don't have enough Black midwives, and that's why I've been trying to keep the gate open for those midwives.
So you said 18 years in Canada,
Yeah,
18 years with the education
years.
system.
Yeah. So teaching in the midwifery education program and
Yes.
practicing midwifery in the midwifery practices here, of which 30% of our births are required to be out of hospital births. That's
Yeah.
legislated into the Midwifery Act here. So we did a lot of advocacy based on the health consumer movement that said we wanted something different. We didn't want the paternalistic, very traumatizing births that we were having in Canada. And of course, we have a federalized sort of insurance system and healthcare system. So the hospitals are not completely privatized. And
Yes.
in a roundabout way, we're always billing the hospital insurance, or the insurance that the government gives to each of its citizens. So we have we're attempting to have universal health care. It's not completely universal. There are a lot of uninsured who have
Yes.
precarious immigration status or who have moved recently. And so it is not a socialized medicine system as you have in the UK. It is
Mhm.
just trying to be as universal as possible and portable.
And the midwifery system, though, is also national, right? There's not a sort of state by state sort of situation that we have in like we have in the US, where certain states you can't have midwives, certain states you can. As far as the
Now
discrimination,
it's national in
it is
every
national.
province and every territory, which we are excited about. There's been a lot of political advocacy going on and lobbying and, making sure resources are set up for midwives to be regulated and
Yes.
paid, compensated for their work so they can build the insurance that they have privileges in each hospital. All of that work has been going on for the last 18 years, so that it went from being only 6 provinces to now all 10 provinces and 3 territories. So, yeah,
And the midwives also can, choose to deliver in the hospital setting, home birth setting, setting.
yes,
Yeah, I think, it's so interesting because when you think of America as the normal, and that this is the way everything else is, it's very difficult for folk who don't know or think outside of this country, outside of the US, that midwifery is actually normal and normalized, right?
mhm,
Maybe it's professionalized, maybe it's not, but no matter what, there isn't any population of people that doesn't know what a midwife is, like
yes.
there is here.
All around the world, every country knows and understands midwifery. They may have different scopes of practice, but Canada was the last industrialized country in the world to integrate midwifery. There had been
Mhm.
midwives here since the 1600s, 1700s. They came from Europe. The ones who came from the Caribbean in the 17 and 1800s, they came because it was part of the British Commonwealth and they came, they weren't allowed to use their skills, but they came having written the exam in the Caribbean, whether it was Grenada or Trinidad or Barbados or Jamaica, in the 1800s and certainly in the 1930s, up until the 1930s, we had Caribbean midwives coming to Canada, but they weren't allowed to practice midwifery like their European counterparts were.
Yes. And that's another, there's all these subtle ways that could almost just slip right by you if you didn't think or didn't understand the genesis of these ways of being.
Right.
Um, we in America, of course, our struggle is the outcomes, the horrendous and egregious outcomes, maternal and infant, not just the birthing dyads, but their family as well. The
Yeah.
impact of this morbidity and mortality and
Yes.
the racial disparity that continues to stand. And in some cases, the gaps widen, the statistics worsen. And that's
Mhm.
based on absolutely nothing to do with physiology. Not one thing.
Right. It is all due to
Racism.
racism. It's due to poor access to the social determinants of health. We've even, labeled racism now and some of the other discriminations as one of the social determinants of health.
Exactly. What else could you do?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
structural.
yeah,
It's a structural situation on purpose. There's no accident. And
exactly.
so there's the glaringly obvious ways and issues, and then there's those subtle, nobody even quite recognizes what just happened or how it happened or
Well,
even
I'll give you an example. This is a true story. A woman who is highly educated, who has a very high-ranking job with the Canadian government, can come to a local community hospital that receives provincial funding and is supposed to make themselves accessible universally to everyone. This woman can wait in the waiting room for 5 hours. Granted, we do have longer waiting times in our emergency rooms than you do in the United States. But unfortunately, this woman can be ignored. She's being polite, she's being too quiet, she doesn't want to be the angry Black woman, and she can sit there and die. They can code her when they realize she wasn't making it up, that she's in severe pain, she's weak. they need to do some investigation. They need to admit her. It's her second visit this weekend. So that is still happening. And it is happening for cardiac, neurological, as well as pregnancy related
Yeah.
kinds of issues. People are dying in the hospital under the watch of nurses, physicians, and midwives because they're not noticing. There are a lot of myths about it, the pain couldn't be that bad, or Black women have a high tolerance for pain.
Mm.
So all of that means that there are a large number of us that are not being counted. There is one first of its kind national study looking at the numbers because in Canada we did not count. We have not been counting as you do in the UK or the United States or Australia. We have not been counted. We didn't know how many people were dying of COVID. Now we know, once we've counted, that the largest percentage of those dying from COVID, first frontline workers, were Black individuals during COVID. We now know that there's a significantly higher number of Black women dying with severe maternal mortality diagnoses, severe. There are a larger number of Black women dying. And I don't want to take the wind out of this publication that's going to be coming out, but you're going to be hearing news soon, first of its kind, population-based data about Black women dying, about preterm labor, about severe mortality in our population. And it was always there. It's data of the last decade. It was always there.
On all the levels, it is more sometimes than you can bear because it's preventable, it's unnecessary,
Mm-hmm.
it just is another layer of
Yes.
harm that has been built into our ways of being.
But we can
Mm,
change that. The next generation is not as polite or as quiet as we are. They are agitating for change. They are coming into the midwifery schools. And this is, a multiracial group of Generation X, Generation Z. They're coming as immigrants, they're coming as Black, as white women, as, gender diverse people. They're coming because maybe they experienced some trauma during their birthing experience and their
mm,
families, and they want to make a difference. They're dedicated and they're passionate. So, for those of us who are elders now and we're feeling tired, there's hope. There's another generation. They want to hear from us. They're just sitting at our feet, wanting for us to pour some inspiration into them, and they want to hear our stories.
Karline, what has helped you all these years through all of these types of circumstances and systems? You've been deep in the service delivery. You've been deep in amongst the families and the communities. You've also been in this academic world and with the students, with the faculty. What has helped you ground yourself and prevail? How did you do that?
I found mentors, I found colleagues. Um, Anyone new coming into the university, I latched myself onto them and wanted to mentor them and support them. And likewise, if I was going into a research project where I was like a fish out of water, I didn't know what I was doing, I sought folks both within my university and outside my university. That's why I continue to have strong ties with my colleagues in the United States because I needed to maintain the village network without
Hmm.
being practical advice and mentorship, and without having support when I was gaslit or when people were, basically harming me. I needed to have a safe space to just be. And I'm very, very grateful. I'm grateful for the Elders Council. I'm grateful for the Midwives of Color Committee. I'm grateful for just the individual friends who they've kept me going. And there are times when your family doesn't understand the
Right.
intricacies and the challenges, and they're wondering because of course you tend to be the strong person. They just expect you'll be okay, you'll be fine. And you can't always share everything with them anyway, because it's you don't want to
Mm.
traumatize them.
Yeah.
So having this village network of other midwives, other birth workers in general, it doesn't necessarily have to be a midwife, someone who's concerned about families, it's been rewarding.
Yes, I think this is our time as we, begin to age out, so to speak, to reflect and recognize how, this struggle is real. And at the same time, we have found ways to be resilient. We've found ways to carry on, and we definitely found each other. I mean, I've named my podcast The Perinatal Pause because I feel like we've been rushing around like chickens with our heads cut off for so long and carrying the brunt of all of this extra. And so sometimes, you get to that point, you're either made to stop or you have to stop and
Mhm.
take that pause. I mean, what I'm trying to get to the bottom of, what does a true pause look like for us birth workers, us midwives? How do we actually do that part of taking care of ourselves? And how many of us can hold that by ourselves? I don't think it's possible to do it on your own.
No, we can't. We need each other to hold each other accountable, remind each other that it's okay to let go, to rest. Rest becomes part of our resistance, it becomes part of our activism because we weren't allowed, our ancestors weren't allowed to rest, our parents weren't allowed to rest. So for us to rest says, you know what? I'm standing up to the establishment and I'm resting. I'm taking care of this temple right here. I'm taking
Mhm.
care of my heart because I need to be here for a few more years. So I think we need to be true to ourselves. We need to listen to our sister friends and our family and our village when they say to us, you know what, you've been going for the whole day. Do you need a cup of tea? Have you gone
That's
to the bathroom? You know,
right.
it's like just listening to them. And I find sometimes I need to actually get away. I need to leave North America. And it means going to the Caribbean. It means going to Africa. When I go on these global health volunteer trips, I
Yes.
receive just as much as I give. I got back from Ghana and I continue to once a month hold a research collaboration meeting on Zoom because I've fallen in love with this university and the whole group. They're low resourced and they don't have enough faculty, and here they are trying to manage. But it's such a
Right.
joy to work with them. The optimism, the love of life that they have, and their willingness to just share life together. They would share their food, they would share their hospitality, but just sharing their lives. So sometimes getting away and out of our little world
Mhm.
at work and going somewhere else and just enjoying others' company, just getting
Yeah.
out of our little office or our little clinic and going somewhere else. And even though it might be physical, it may be involving, putting on a workshop or sometimes even giving care, it somehow feels different. It rejuvenates
It
me.
does.
Yeah.
It really does.
Mm,
Yeah. I think it's interesting how, there's an analogy that comes for me a lot, as midwives, as people who support and serve birthing families,
mhm,
there's nothing that's too much for us when it comes to making sure they stay centered, making sure that they are treated well as human beings with dignity,
mhm,
with respect. We do that without fail. Doesn't matter what could be going on around us, doesn't matter what circumstances we're in, we will hold that sacred. And
mhm,
I think as we begin to see the wisdom of doing that for ourselves,
mhm.
the same way with the same level of passion and dedication that we have for the families, that that's our access point to our liberation,
Yes.
so that we still have for ourselves and each other that level of commitment to making sure, no
Mm,
matter the circumstances, that
mhm,
we are 100% holding that space with
mhm,
that person, be they midwife or birthing mama. It's the
mhm,
same thing and it's the same process.
mhm. I'd strongly encourage us as midwives who are living in the Northern Hemisphere. Some of the aches and pains that we're feeling have to do with being away from vitamin D in the
Mm,
Northern Hemisphere in the cold. We need to be taking good care of ourselves in terms of getting physiotherapy, massage, acupuncture, reflexology, taking herbs in, getting advice if we're not, as adept at using herbology on ourselves. Um, you know, going on retreats. We need to do that for each other because that's what we did
That's right.
ancestrally. That's what we did. How can we reinvent that somehow? And I know it's difficult.
It is.
It's this life is designed to be like a factory model in the West and in the North. You have to be on time and you have to clock all of these hours, and we have to sort of squeeze our health in.
Yes.
So you have to make time, you have to put it on your schedule, and then it's non-negotiable. That's my massage time. That week is when I am going to Bali, and it's
Right.
non-negotiable. You know,
Yes.
this once a year, trip to Ghana, it's non-negotiable. Sorry, I can't take on that other project this week. You'll have to change the timing of your project, but I can't change the time of my self-care activity.
That's the word.
Mhm.
That is so true. I mean, yes.
Mhm.
And I think holding each other to that, to the accountability of that way of being and thinking also is
Mm.
important, supporting each other to be
Yeah.
able to do that. Um, um, any wise word for the littles, the ones that are like, okay, I'm going to be a midwife one day, my dream, or already on the journey. Anything you want to share with them as we wrap up? Like, what can we tell them, after all these years of experience, of all these hours of service, of all this trial and tribulation? How do we encourage them? What do we say to them that would keep
Uh,
them safe on this journey to midwifery? Because they're going to be on this journey.
I would say they need to get their five best friends together. The cheerleader, the organizer, the one who you can say no wrong, they're always cheering you up. So get your five friends. Um, Make sure that you schedule in to your whole schedule family time. Have a date with your child. Have a date with your partner. Um, though they are part of you forever. They are your biggest investment. Make sure your schedule always has them. You're
Mhm.
working 40 to 60 hours a week, sometimes more. Schedule them in somewhere before you take anything else in. And of course schedule your self-care in, and have your village. Whatever that
Yes.
village is, it could be your WhatsApp group, it could be, and we do have a WhatsApp group that ends up being a peer review group for the Black community in Canada. So we have a WhatsApp group, the students have a WhatsApp group, and the midwives have a WhatsApp group. And when the students graduate, they join the midwife WhatsApp group. And at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, it could be your salvation, either because
Indeed.
you just not sure if when you had a conflict with someone or you were trying to advocate for your client and you're thinking, why can't I get this done? Someone may have an idea of how to get around whatever that block is. So having that WhatsApp group, and if there's some sort of get together where you can get together with someone in person in addition to the WhatsApp group,
Yes.
that could be your elixir of life. We need that as human beings. We need that. And we don't get it automatically as racialized people. We have to make it happen because we're not in the dominant group here. This is not our home. We have a home, but while we're here, we need to make community. So I'm so glad that when I came back to Canada, I started to reconnect with old connections, but made new connections. I
Mm.
had to make a new community, and they've been a lifeline for me.
So beautiful.
Mhm.
So I want to thank you, Elder Midwife Karline, for pausing with us and sharing your sacred story today. And may your hands and your heart and your history continue to guide us. And this has been a moment of remembering and resting and reclaiming
Mhm.
with the Perinatal Pause podcast and the hands that caught us. And I'm so very grateful. I'm so thankful you came, and I love you. I just have to say that. I just love you.
You,
I'm so glad we
you.
crossed paths.
I received that. I am so grateful for you, and um, you've been an inspiration to so many of our students. I have to tell you, if you only knew, this is worldwide. Worldwide, you are an inspiration. And how great is that? So if you ever think, is it getting through? Is anything happening? It's happening. You may not always hear back from everyone because they're scattered all over the world, but you mean a lot to them. Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you, Karline.